Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ames. I am a musician, producer, and music production teacher. Today we're going to be talking about how to use multiple reverbs in your mix. So I was working with a student yesterday and he was like, yeah, I created an aux track and I put a reverb plugin on it and it has a nice big kind of room sound, and I sent all of my tracks there at varying levels of sendage. And he was like, I like how the reverb sounds on certain instruments that are going there, that are getting sent there, but not all of, it doesn't all sound cohesive even though it's all in the same room. And if it's all in the same room, shouldn't it sound cohesive? Wouldn't that make sense? It's like when a bunch of people are in a room together playing something, it sounds, the sound is cohesive because they're all in the same place. But what I've found is that using multiple reverbs in conjunction with one another, right? So this set of instruments has this reverb sound. This other set, maybe the vocals, has a different sound. Sometimes they just all need their own space, or groups of instruments need their own spaces, and the same reverb just won't work for all of your tracks, all of your instruments. A big reason for this is also the EQ of the reverb. So a lot of reverb plugins have EQ built in, so you can change the color, the tone of the reverb itself, and sometimes they don't, so you have to put an EQ plugin after your reverb in the chain to color the sound of the reverb separately. So if you send everything to the same reverb plugin, sometimes you'll find things like, oh, there's too much low end because of the kick. And you take low end out and you're like, well, now there's not enough low end in the vocals, right? And we're talking about the reverb here, not the actual dry track. So that's why using one reverb for everything is kind of messy and doesn't usually work all that well. When I was younger, when I was a kid and I was recording music for the first time, I would just put a reverb plugin on my master track, like on my stereo out, and I thought that was how you used reverb, and it turns out it's not. And my track sounded messy. My songs just sounded just all over the place. And that was one of the reasons why. So let's dive into a session. I have my band's most recent song that just came out last week. I have that session open to just look at all the reverbs I'm using and how I'm using them and why I'm using them. And we can do a little deep dive into how to use a bunch of different reverbs in conjunction with each other to make your track sound nice and balanced. Okay, so I just wrapped up editing the video and I just wanted to jump in here quick before the video really gets started and say that I really learned so much by even making this video. I learned so much about kind of what I do and what my mixes sound like. And a big thing I realized while I was making this video is I think I overdid the reverb in the song that I was demonstrating here. And we actually went back and did a little remix and kind of stripped some of the reverb off of everything and made it a little more dry and upfront. So kind of just keep that in mind, that as I was editing this video, I was like, I think I didn't follow my advice well enough and I still overdid the reverb. So you'll hear me multiple times in this video say, well, don't overdo it, just a little at a time, little goes a long way. And I kind of made that mistake in this very song. So just keep that in mind. I'm learning, you guys are learning, we're all learning together. We learn by doing and making stuff that we end up saying, this has too much reverb in it. And there's no shame in that, so let's get on with the video. Okay, so here we are in the Logic session. I'm gonna open up my mixer view real quick and just show you that basically all of my aux tracks are down here at the end of my mix. So a bunch of reverbs, which I'll talk about, obviously, and then one delay send for the vocals. So basically I just have groups of instruments being sent to whichever one of these reverbs is the right one for them to get sent to. If you're confused about buses and sends and what they do and how to use them, you can check out my video about that. Go watch that first so this doesn't confuse you. I'll put the link on the screen wherever it goes. This track is just a classic rock and roll song. It's not like a classic rock song, not like Led Zeppelin, but it's in the sense of it's a pure rock song, right? The instruments are drums, electric bass, there's clean guitar, there's distorted guitar, and there's a bunch of vocals. So it's a classic rock sound. I'm just basically going to break down every track in order of how they're set up here. So we're going to start with the drums. So the drums on their own have kind of a big roomy sound, like they're in a big room, but I still sent them to another extra reverb, and I didn't turn it up that much. You can see it's only, my send's at -20, but just wanted like a little extra space in there. So let's take a listen. You can hear how it's like a big wide open space. Think about drum reverb though, and when people want like a big boomy like this, like a big reverby, big room, huge drum sound, I think they tend to overdo it on the length of the reverb decay. But if you think about it, if you want something to have a lot of reverb and the instrument is playing very sporadically, like holding out a chord or just doing like a chord shot, like bow, bow, right? There's so much space in between each hit that you want a long decay, so that decay kind of soaks up all the sound in between the hits. But for drums, and of course this isn't for every drum part, but for like a rock song like this, there are a lot of drum hits. So every time something gets hit, it's gonna trigger that reverb to swell. So if your decay is too long, there's gonna be a lot of decay stacking up on top of each other, and it's gonna be very messy sounding. So the trick to making a good drum reverb sound is don't overdo it on the decay, because it's just gonna get in the way of itself. So like my standard go-to decay time is only 1.5 seconds. So you can hear when we get to the chorus, there's a lot going on. It sounds like a big reverb, but it's not decaying that long. Right, so you get like a big reverb shot at the beginning, but it dies fairly quickly, especially in the mix. And maybe if it was like a more sporadic drum part, like I was saying before, I would make the decay a little bit longer to fill in those gaps. All right, next we're gonna talk about the bass. But what I do with all my electric basses and my electric bass tracks and my electric guitar tracks, so I record DI, direct input, right to my interface, and then I go through this plugin Guitar Rig, which is just an amp emulator for guitar and bass. So when you do it like that, it's an entirely 1,000,000,000% dry sound, because it's going from the pickups into the interface, into the computer. There's no air. There's no real life sound happening. I like to use Guitar Rig for guitar because I love my amp and my setup, but I don't really have enough like live gear to always get the guitar sound I want, and Guitar Rig has unlimited options for sounds. But like I said, the drawback is that it doesn't sound entirely like a real recording because there's no live sound happening at all. So the way I get past that is I put an amp room reverb on my bass and electric guitar. So if we come over here, you can see this aux track is called amp room, and if I open up the chroma verb, so we have like a very short reverb happening here. In my mind and my ears, this basically just simulates having a room mic while you're recording a guitar amp, right? So you have 1 or 2 or 3 mics close up on the amp, and then you have a mic, 15 feet away or 10 feet away in the room to pick up how the amp sounds in that room. But since I'm going DI, you don't have that, and I need to kind of pretend like that's happening to make it sound a little more realistic. So if we isolate the bass and we turn the amp room off, this is just the dry bass tone. It sounds really good. It's nice and grungy and heavy, but it's just like it's just right there. Like there's like no space at all. So if I turn that amp room on, and I'll turn it on while it's playing, you can hear how you just get like a little splash of life in the stereo field, and it just brings it to life a little bit. In the mix, it's like, in the mix, does it matter? I think it matters. I think every single tiny little piece matters. So just by adding that little splash of it sounds to me like a literal splash of fresh air, like room air. I think it makes it sit a little more realistically in the mix. So also in that amp room, I have my 2 electric guitars. I have 2 tracks of distorted electric guitar right here, which come in the chorus and the bridge. And I'm also sending those 2 guitar tracks to the amp room with the bass. So let's hear the dry guitar signal, and then I'll toggle it on and off as it plays. hear how when I turned it on, it kind of like, it like pushed it back a little and maybe out a little. It makes it sound a little less like in your face. Like I said with the bass, like it was right there. That's kind of what that DI through an amp emulator gives you. It's just like guitar, you know? When I turn the amp room on, it's like, oh, it's guitar in a room, which is how we hear guitars all the time. We hear them in a room, not directly fed into our brains and ears. And on one of the first mixes of the song, I kind of overdid it on the amp room with the guitars because I sent it to a buddy of mine, and he's not a guitar player, he's not a musician, but he loves music. So he listened to it a few times and he was like, I feel like the guitars are kind of far away. He's like, what is happening? Because he doesn't know, like, oh, you're using too much reverb. So he was just like, they just feel kind of far away. I don't really know how to explain it. And I was like, oh, I think I'm going to dial back the amp room a little because I just added too much and it made it sound like, you know, there's too much room mic sound and not enough like dry amp sound. All right, so we covered the amp room and the drum room. Let's talk about, so I have Guitar Verb 2. And I actually went into this mix earlier to prep for this and I was like, what the hell is in Guitar Verb 2? And I was like, oh, it's the clean guitars that come in and out throughout the song. So the clean guitars are interesting because there's a reverb and delay on them. For some reason I put the delay right on the track and not in a send. Sometimes I guess I don't follow my own rules, that's fine. So it's not in the amp room because I basically replaced the amp room. I swapped the amp room sound for a 2.2 second decay. And that's because I wanted the clean guitars to kind of have, well, you'll hear what they're playing. It's like a slowly picked thing. Here, check it out. Right, and like I was saying before, when you have parts that aren't happening so rapidly, there aren't that many hits or notes at any given time, that's when you can pull out like the long decay reverb to fill in those spaces between notes. So if I had them just in the amp room or everything, it would still sound pretty dry because it's just going bum, 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 and it's like, you know, the longer decay holds it over to the next strums, the next picks. So that's why I went for a longer decay on the clean guitar reverb. And while we're here, let's talk about something that for some reason I haven't mentioned yet, which I should have mentioned already. Reverb EQ. The EQ of your reverb is so important, and that's it's a main reason why I use so many different reverbs. It's not just the decay times and, you know, whatever else is going on in the reverb. Like I said during the intro of the video, you know, if you're using just one reverb and you're like, oh, the kick's producing too much boom in the reverb, and you take it out, and you're like, well, now something else is missing low end, and you can't change anything individually. So for this clean guitar reverb, you can see I took up to, let's see, what is this at? 12,000 hertz, right? I scooped that right out because I guess I was getting some like tinniness in the reverb, which was just like, you hear it in the background, it's just like, right? But I wanted some more gentle brightness, so I added 2350 hertz here, just like a, you know, like a pretty wide, actually it's an extremely wide Q, and then I just scooped out some low mids, some mud out of that, and it's crazy how you can hear this. So I'm just going to play this part back, and I'm going to leave the reverb on, but I'm going to toggle the EQ of the reverb. So when I turn the EQ off and this 210 hertz comes back up to 0, it adds mud to the mix that it's not really that audible by itself, but it's every single reverb you use. I mean, a question I get all the time is like, how do I get rid of mud in my mix? Like, it sounds so muddy and messy and cloudy. And I'm like, check your reverbs, because a lot of the times there's just too much low mid in all of the reverbs or the single reverb. But I'm like, check every single one of your reverb sends and to take a little bit of mud out of like all of them, and it can clean up your mix, or just one of them, or a few, who knows. And what's really cool about doing it this way is that when you have it going to a send, you can just solo out the reverb send and just listen to the reverb. So this is just the reverb on the guitar. And you hear when I toggle the EQ off, that mud comes back. So now when I do that, the reverb sound itself is a much cleaner, tighter sound. So if you think about all the reverb tracks you have, all the reverb sends you have, taking that little bit of mud or taking a little bit of like tinniness out like I did up here. When you take out a little bit of all these things in all of your reverbs, that's how you clean up your mix. All right, moving on to the vocal reverb room. For this, I'm gonna turn off the delay because it's just too confusing. All right, so this is what the lead vocal sounds like, sans delay and just with the reverb.
Did you really even love me? Did you just like the idea of me in my manic pixie past?
We got a little vocal hall, 1.4 seconds, so pretty similar to the sound of the drum room. I'm taking out low end and low mids with this shelf here, taking out a little bit of high end so there's no hiss when she hits those S's, right? Because I'm ducking out those S's with the de-esser on the track, but just in case anything scooted through, I didn't want to make it worse by having too much high end in the reverb itself. And then I'm just boosting 2250 hertz, which I guess I deduced when I was mixing this that that's kind of where her vocal sits for a lot of it, and boosting that will just bring out the vocal reverb as a whole and make it sound nice and crisp. So I'm also sending the harmony vocals there, but I'm sending them at minus 26, so 10 dB less than the lead vocal, because I want them to sound like they're in the same room, but I don't want to send as much in the harmony because then we just have stacking reverb and it could be too much reverb. And I think what I've learned just through years of mixing, and I'm still learning, still there's always a lot to learn. I mean, I'm definitely more proud of this song than anything I've ever made, and I think part of that is learning how to use reverbs properly. And what I've learned is put a little bit of reverb on basically everything. And what I used to do is put a lot of reverb on everything, and I couldn't figure out why there was too much mud or my song sounded messy. And I think I've just learned to be a little less generous with reverb, just dial it back a little. But yeah, it's basically just put a dollop here, a dollop there. So just play with different reverbs, different sizes, different colors, different EQs. All right, so that is how I use multiple reverbs in my mixes. Like I said, I kind of have defaults. I kind of have standards to, what's gonna go where. My drums always go here. My electric instruments always go here. So just play around. And if you're ever like, I don't have a good reverb for this, just make a new one. Just make a new aux track, a new send, and just see what happens. I mean, computers are endlessly powerful now, and you can just do as many different kind of reverbs as you want. And I would say be careful. Be careful though. The only thing I'll say be careful about is just be careful about overdoing it, because they all interact with each other. They all play with each other. So if you have a little too much of a lot of reverb, you're just gonna have a lot too much as a whole. If you like that song I was playing with today, you can check it out wherever you get your music, Spotify, all the streaming platforms, all the purchasing platforms. It's called Minus Sign, and our band is Cute Threat. Let me know in the comments how you use reverb, if this was enlightening, if you think I'm wrong. I mean, maybe I shouldn't be inviting those kinds of comments, but this is how I do it. This is how I learned. This is how I learned from my professors and people like that who I look up to and learned from in a technical way. And this is also how I learned by just messing around with stuff and saying, it doesn't work with one reverb. I'm just going to try different ones for everything and see how they mingle. And as always, I'll say that I teach one-on-one music production lessons through Zoom. So if you ever want someone to say, can you listen to my mix? Can you tell me what it's missing, what it needs, or how do I do these specific things? How do you get that kind of sound? Really anything like that, just let me know. We can jump on a Zoom session together and talk about some stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.